Here we go. Right, Luke, I've hit record again. Second rolling start. I hope so. I was just saying that we probably won't show the previous bit now. Saying that it's quite interesting doing these things because people have commented on the fact that it's more like a conversation that they almost shouldn't be privy to. So the fact that it's got a
Yeah.
brand and everything, and I said to Tim, who I started this with, that actually what would be really good is if people just sort of started taking this concept away and doing their own version of it. Call it whatever you
Yeah.
like. Untitled show, just put your own name on it. It really doesn't matter, and we don't care enough about that really. It's more just having interesting conversations with interesting people and
Mhm.
learning something from it perhaps, and else might find something. So go ahead, Luke. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm Luke Robbins, sort of a relatively new into the game motorcycle designer.
Relatively
Graduated.
new. I've at least for the past 3 years I've known you've been doing this, so I'm not sure
Well,
you call that new.
the span of a career, it's still early days, but I'm trying to sort of like maximize what I'm doing in that time at least. But
Nice.
obviously, AI has been a prominent part of my career so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's interesting how the creative industry is very much fight or flight about it all, and I think that's why it's even more of an intriguing sort of technology to grapple with and embrace, really. But to your point, I was just going to say about like the Untitled show. I think that in itself is sort of case in point. It's untitled. It's this blank sheet of paper. People can take it and interpret it how they like. It's not wedded to one or two people or anything like that. And I think that's quite cool. Is that there's almost like the ownership is sort of like decentralized.
Yeah, totally. You've got the gist of it. I think you've qualified yourself for being on the show. Anyone else who's listening as well, I suppose they can use this. So the format is as I'm sure if your sort of audience don't know this format, we thought it would be quite interesting to mash a couple of topics together, right? So we'd effectively take um, and I actually used AI. I used Claude to create an artifact. An artifact is basically some code that does something, and you prompt it into existence. And I basically told it to give me this mashup on. So we'll have three post-it notes, and then we can pick from whichever post-it note to talk about the topics on that post-it note. But every time we press generate a new juxtaposition, it would come up with some new sort of topics. So we'll spend like 10 minutes or so talking about that. I really want to pick apart the stuff that you said about AI as well, because recently I found out, uh, I mean, much to my surprise, or maybe not surprise, that people tend to froth about anything. And so the Jaguar sort of rebrand, it's not even a rebrand, it's just like a new introduction. It's something completely
Mm-hmm.
new and fresh. I didn't even want to express an opinion about it, but I found myself sucked into doing a post, that I felt really compelled to do, just to say, stop frothing about this stuff.
Yep.
It's completely irrelevant what you think. If you're not a Jag owner, especially, you shouldn't. I mean, I say that, but I just feel like designers could sort of channel their energies into more constructive things in discussion, in learning, in all sorts, as opposed to shitting on other designers, right? It's just
Absolutely.
common sense. Like, if we want our industry to be elevated, why do we engage in such behaviors, I suppose? So there we go.
Well said. I think it was your post. But to your point, it's only designers that seem to have that ego almost, or that arrogance
Do you
associated to it, where
reckon?
they. Well, I don't know. I mean, just when it comes to the design, I just find that people seem to be more compelled to share their opinions,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't know,
Maybe there's
almost
another
rather than
thing.
the fact that they approve or don't.
Is there a case of, Luke, that people think that they're design anyone thinks that they're a designer as well, which is fine. I mean, if that's how they think, is the bar like really low or something? Is that what it is?
I mean, I suppose I wouldn't even say everyone has an opinion though, because I think
Yeah.
it's not always the case. But maybe it's just the fact that when something is so shockingly new and challenging in that respect, then perhaps that's what is triggering people. Because I think to your point as well, I've deliberately not like publicized my opinions on it
Mm.
because I'm waiting to see how the launch goes in like next week. I want to see how
Yeah,
the
there's wisdom
branding
in
ties into
that.
the car and the whole picture.
Absolutely, there's wisdom in holding your breath for a second, just allowing it to sort of permeate, and seeing, just watching the room and seeing how people respond to it as well. It's sometimes something that I tend to do with before forming a full reaction there. But I suppose people feel very passionate about certain topics, and I think brands evoke those kind of senses as well. Anyway, enough talk about that because I feel like we're going to be frothing. One of these topics has actually caught my eye, but I want to shut up and just ask which of these topics are interesting to you.
I wasn't even I wasn't paying attention to those. I was fully hooked on the Jaguar. Smart handlebar navigation meets immersive learning interfaces. Interesting.
Yeah.
Peer-to-peer mobility networks meets immersive sensory feedback. Which one's catching your eye so far?
I quite like the smart handlebar navigation because I
Mm,
do love haptics, right?
yep.
I think they're really underused. Recently, Luke, I'm a kind of an Apple. This is an Apple household, right? So everywhere I go as well, like I kind of encourage people to go down the Apple route, good or bad, because I'm actually quite agnostic to using PCs as well. So my
Mhm.
main sort of machine, maybe a Mac, but the real power sort of force is sitting next to me here. It's a PC, and I grew up with PCs. But anyway, point I was going to make is that on the Apple sort of watches, you've got this beautiful sort of haptic sort of taptic engine that does gorgeous little sort of taps when you touch it, when it does a little notification. It was only when I felt the notification on the CMF watch, the one by Nothing,
Mhm.
that I thought, that really feels cheap. I was like, that's
Oh,
like proper, yeah, it's proper like vibrating my hand in a very, um, I don't know, it wasn't as delicate as some of the other things that they've done, all the other niceness. But I mean, it's such a cheap, it's a much cheaper proposition. It's like 50 quid versus, £300 on an Apple Watch or so. So it's
but
funny because we
beyond that
notice,
haptic though,
yeah,
do you feel like the user experience could be elevated simply by that the tactile experience of that vibration of the notifications and things? Like, would that single-handedly elevate the perception of cost?
that's such a great question. I like how deep you're thinking about it. Actually, like straight to the jugular. I think most products are very holistic. Whether it's a car, motorcycle, it's a watch, a clock, whatever it is, it's the entirety of the experience that we tend to remember. It's how it makes you feel, I suppose. And if one part of that feels out of kilter with the rest of it, I'm afraid to say that for me, it tarnishes it. Like, and it could just be a personal thing where if something doesn't, and this is why it's so hard to buy tech these days for me. Like, I just feel I've been recently looking at so well I've finished my quest now. I've landed on a camera that I really love now. But every 18 months or so, I'm like, I get bored of the thing and I'm like, I'm going to have to try something else. And but it's that whole process of figuring out that makes you feel something about design. I'm just wondering if you have anything like that where you feel actually when it comes to purchasing something, or I value this part of the experience more than the other, or do you see it holistically as well? What's it like for you?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the Apple Watch that I have.
Yeah.
So I was actually reluctant to buy one because I didn't want to feel like I was dependent on it. So, when you see all of the things that it can do,
Yeah.
monitoring your sleeping and, blood, and then obviously all the workouts and stuff like that, I didn't want to feel like it was going to become an extension of myself, and therefore I had to
Okay.
constantly have it on.
That's interesting.
Um, so that's why I was, yeah, as I said, reluctant to make the plunge into getting one.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm sort of like trying to straddle that line of using it for the functions that I want to like capitalize on, but equally then I'm trying to walk that line of, yeah, being able to sort of take it off and not feel like I'm missing it.
I hear you.
Uh,
Okay, that's interesting.
so, but the other thing that I just really like about them is like from a design perspective, it on my wrist it feels perfectly balanced, and I love the way it looks. And I love the fact as well, though, with the watch face, the fact that it's customizable and then everyone can sort of extend their sort of personality and identity through it in a way.
It's funny you're touching on so many like digital product related things, and I'm pretty sure when we last spoke as well, when we were at the RCA thing,
Mm.
this topic of personalization, I think, just rings a bell somewhere for me. Um,
Yeah.
Getting back to this topic though, right? Do you
Yeah.
think that, first of all, like when you're riding a motorcycle, right? Not that I've ridden many. If you're riding a motorcycle, you barely feel like, you're not going to feel, unless it's a really strong sort of sensation. That smart handlebar isn't going to like give you like I don't even know where haptic came into it. Smart handlebar navigation. I'm assuming that if you were to have a handlebar that helps you with the navigation, it gives you
Hmm.
some kind of cues as to where to go, right? Is that
So the first thing that came to mind for that is I used to work for Arc, and they had the Nox armor, which had the haptics in the jacket. So
sure?
it could detect if you were on a motorway. It could detect like if a car was overtaking you, and would then start to send vibrations up your back as the car got closer to you. So
Oh, that's interesting.
that was like the first thing that came to mind. So I was then thinking, okay, well, how would that translate into navigation? So I was then thinking perhaps like the gloves. What if through your fingers, it could send like a pulse outwards to say like if you're turning left from your index finger out to your little finger, it could send like haptic feedback to say like you're turning left.
I like
But
that.
then, as
Yeah.
you say, if you're riding a motorcycle, unfortunately the UK roads aren't the best. So if you're going over potholes and you're going over speed
You
bumps
don't
and
want to
all
go
those kind of
over any
things,
potholes, do
how
you?
are you how are you going to be feeling that additional vibration?
I see.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And would that also then be a distraction?
I suppose just the idea of a smart handlebar as well is really fascinating. When we talk about haptics, maybe we should also talk about sort of the positive interactions as well. How you can sort
Mm.
of engage with something, and just your muscle memory almost of how something works, or where you activate something. When Vital was sort of developing the interface for the BSA motorcycle, we looked at so many sort of peripheral devices that you get for motorcycles, and then we looked at the actual interactions within typical sort of HMI, human machine interface, and we realized that some of those things you're never going to want to interact with while you're actually riding. God, it would be atrocious. What can you imagine? I can't even imagine doing that. And you can use voice, you can
Yep.
do all sorts of other things, but you don't want to be messing about with menus while you're. Just a no no as far as I'm concerned. So we developed
Yeah.
eye tracker to look at how people use these. We sort of looked at a variety of ways of offboarding the sort of the kind of functionality onto an app, and so we developed a fully fledged app for this particular function. So I think